Hello and welcome to another episode of But Why, the podcast that's all about digging into big questions and tricky topics via honest conversations. And this week we're going to be looking at family with Julia Samuel, MBE. And actually her book, which I'm going to show to camera now, Every Family Has a Story, is the reason I'm feeling a bit tired today because I've stayed up 2 nights in a row reading way past my bedtime. It's absolutely brilliant, and we'll talk about that more in depth in a minute. If you don't know Julia, she's a leading British psychotherapist and the author of Sunday Times bestsellers This Too Shall Pass and Grief Works. During the last 30 years she's worked first for the NHS and then for private practice, and she's founder patron of Child Bereavement UK and a vice president of the British Association for Counselling and Psychotherapy. Her latest book draws on a variety of families and sessions she's had with them, and she analyses common issues from loss to leaving home to separation to step relationships, and shows us how they pass from one generation to the next. It's absolutely fascinating. I'm trying to work out if it appeals to the nosy neighbour in me because you get to hear about other people's families, or just because you can draw on it for yourself, or a bit of both. So without further ado, let's get cracking. I always like to start with 3 quite easy questions. How are you really? What star sign are you? And what's your favourite crisp?
So, how am I really? I do feel a bit kind of punched by the news that Russia has done a full assault onto the Ukraine.
Well,
And
no.
I guess we knew it was coming, but it just does feel it's like on top of a bloody pandemic, there's now going to be a
I know.
war in Europe. It's just that feels scary and unknown, and I'm fed up with unknown. Um,
Mm.
and my favourite, my star sign is I'm Virgo,
Are you?
September, yes.
Mm-hmm.
So a bit of a perfectionist, but I'm
Yeah.
not actually. But anyway, and I'm a twin, and my twin brother is very different to me, so I always wonder about the star signs. But I was born 5 minutes after him. And then my favourite crisps are any crisp, but I guess salted vinegar flavour if I have to
If you
choose.
had to. Yeah, crisps are just really excellent, aren't they?
And they're so good for you.
They're not at all Moorish.
No.
So, to give the listener some context, could you explain how the setup of the book really, and how you came to get the sources of information in them?
So, I mean, I'm fascinated by my own family from, what I didn't learn from my parents, what they didn't tell me, the secrets and the
Mm.
stories that were left unsaid. And as a parent, trying to negotiate being a parent and now a grandparent. So, kind of knowing myself and knowing my own family has been incredibly important to me. But also, any client that has ever walked through my door in the last kind of over 30 years has always talked about their family, whether it's their family of
Mm.
origin, the family they're in, and the family they're making. So, I really believe families, when they work, are the bedrock of our lives. And when they don't work, at the sort of far end of the bad spectrum, because I think families, they're always kind of functioning or dysfunctioning depending on what's going on externally. So if there's a sudden crisis, somebody dies or someone loses their job or they have a health diagnosis, all the kind of default lines of injury in families get played out. So I think families are always kind of under pressure and they seek homeostasis. And really it depends on their coping behaviors of how they manage those difficulties. But the thing I had never seen properly written about, although there is increasing research about, was multi generation families. So I had worked with families with parents and their kids, but I had never worked with a family with a grandmother, their adult daughter, and their kind of 20-year-old child.
Mm.
And I felt that we inherit so much of our behaviors, our beliefs, our values, our ways of being, everything that we learn about relationship, we learn in our childhood and gets played out in every aspect in our adulthood, in adulthood, in work, in fun, in sex, in friendships, in close relationships, all of that is formed in our childhood. So, I mean, to me, there isn't a subject that is more interesting, more complex, or more important. So, I jumped
It's the
in.
one.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I love the byline on it, which is a history of connection as well as wounds and hurt, and that just summarizes it completely, doesn't it? It so intrinsically makes us who we are, both externally and internally. And I loved when I first went into researching these questions is that idea that I have a concept of what family is, but that's only based on my family because and my experience, and no two people's version of that is going to be the same.
That is absolutely right. So that you can have a family that is sort of thought of as a traditional kind of nuclear family with, a couple that are together with their kids. But you can have a family that is a polyamorous family. You can have a blended family. You can have a family that is a single parent family, and you can have a family that is made up of friends that feels like family that you
Mm,
choose, and not family that is blood relation. And I think actually one of the I'm talking too much already, but anyway, I think
I
one
love
of
it.
the things that came out for me from the book was that we've put so much emphasis on blood relations, on our genetics. Um, and through my work with the Wynne family, where the Ivo, the man who came to see me, found that his
Mm,
biological father wasn't his father he was brought up by, and also the adopting family, the Singing Kelly family, when they adopted a child, and the step families, was that actually it's the love and connection that we have to each other that makes our family. It's our
mm.
investment in that relationship. It's the importance and significance of that relationship that makes them a family. And if there is a genetic blood tie, that is part of it. But actually, if there isn't, I don't think there's a hierarchy of what is more family or less family. And, I think that comes from old dated kind of beliefs about inheritance of kings and
Mm,
land and
bloodlines.
bloodlines, which don't seem quite so relevant to us in the
No.
21st century.
No, and it's true because that can devalue some non-blood relationships and also put an awful lot of pressure on blood relationships. That just because you share the same gene pool, there's some magical connection between you that there might not be. And yeah, it's the people that we collect in our life to be our family for whatever reason, all shape us equally, I think.
Yeah, and exactly. I mean, a third of sibling relationships barely have a relationship. So they may
Is that
be,
true?
yeah, so they may well be kind of genetically bound, but people often say you don't choose your family, and you may find yourself. And normally, I do think it's the environment that you're brought up in that creates those sibling rivalries or those difficulties.
Mm,
But one of the things that often happens in families is this thing of difference, that you can feel like an outsider in your own family. You can feel like you're the one that isn't known in your own family. And then what you do with that will either estrange you from your family, or I hope if you can communicate, bring you closer.
yeah. But it's this interesting thing that you always feel that you're the only one in that situation, whereas the chances are for yeah, most of you or all of you could be having a similar reaction. It's just until it's spoken out loud, you'd never know.
That's really true, and I think we sort of know this now, but it's still often not thought about when we're with our family. Is that five of you can be in the same room witnessing the same event, and you'll agree on the date and the time and who's in the room, but your experience of it will be five different experiences, which if you wrote them on the page, you may not even recognize
So
them.
true.
And then you'll
It's
fight
so
about
true.
who was right and who was wrong. But actually, you need to allow all of those different perceptions. And so, one of the things that I really learned and enjoyed so much about working with these multi generation families is that it opened up these conversations that allowed different narratives. And they weren't competing narratives, they were
Mm,
narratives that were adding to each other's understanding of who they were as a family and expanding their connection with each other, because they went, "Oh, is that why you were like that? Oh, I get it."
Fascinating, because yeah, you could, especially when you've got something which is injected with vast amounts of emotion and history, things get skewed so much, don't they? Just in an instant. That's the thing about family relationships. I did an episode with Clover Stroud about the sister relationship, but how someone in your family can look at you in a certain way, and that just triggers a whole load of things from nowhere. And often with families, there's so much history there that even a current situation is actually being informed by a dinner time that you've had 20 years ago, and so yeah, it's actually, we're not very often living in a very present version of ourselves in those settings, I don't think.
That's so beautifully put, and I agree. And the story that came to mind was the Rossi family, whose three daughters and the wife, their dad and her husband, had died by suicide 40 years before. And the trauma isn't adaptive, and so the trauma had played out in gut wrench and heartache through the decades, through their lives and behaviors and difficulties that they had. Although they were a very loving family, that there was a lot of kind of difficulty. And at the beginning, when the mother, who was incredibly brave, Sarah, was talking to us, she said, they said, Mum, something like, you always react in a particular way, and that kind of scares us. And she said, well, I raise my eyebrow. And so it's like her raised eyebrow would
Is
send
enough
shivers
to
through three adult, 45-year-old women, 40-year-old women who, were
wow.
parents themselves. But that
Mm.
raised eyebrow would kind of ignite, many previous stories that they'd had of her shouting at them or being angry with them. And not because she didn't love them, but because she was traumatized.
Wow, and that, yeah, we can all relate to a version of that, can't we?
Yeah,
About, where the knives and forks are laid on the table, or you didn't get me a glass of water, or some really small things that just mean so much in families. And the problem is, I know in my own family, you get so entrenched in it that you then skew your reality so badly that they would never see that eyebrow for any other thing other than what it represents to them. And yeah.
exactly. Which is fear. And I've done something wrong, and help.
Wow. It's so visceral as well, those
Yeah.
kind of reactions. And I think all of your clients who have been prepared to step into a room together are so brave. That really needs to be acknowledged. I've done a lot of therapy individually and as a couple, but the idea of putting my family in a room together and going for it, because you're going to sit through possibly the most painful conversations you can have.
I mean, I really cannot kind of say enough how grateful I am. And, I say in the book, these are stories, but actually, these are people's individual lives. And they
Mm.
allowed me to step in and march about and ask questions and pull things out of them and raise questions and force them to face difficulties that they hadn't done ever
Mm.
before. And I just totally disguise them, so only they reading it would recognize it's them. So I've been very, a big part of the story writing is, although the situation and all the quotes are verbatim, how I describe them is
Yeah.
is covered up, is not who they really are. um, but what is also interesting, so they were amazingly courageous, and yet when they read the case studies, that became part of the therapy, and they found that very affirming, because it's
Did
like
they?
having a third eye. It's like we were in the room doing the therapy, and that was like, whew,
Mm.
quite hard work, quite painful, as you're saying, or very painful or very difficult. And then reading about it afterwards and reading my perception of how they were with each other and my take on it and the impact it had on me, they felt seen even more. And that felt very therapeutic and quite healing, um, and very powerful. I mean, Archie, he was this, he's still alive, wonderful Scotsman who has a life-threatening diagnosis. He has a brain tumor, and he was told he was going to die last November. When he, I wrote the story about him and his partner and his two adult children about his death, and he was estranged from his parents because they weren't able to cope with his diagnosis. He his best friend said to him, he showed it to his best friend. His best friend said to him, "Everyone should have this. Everyone should have their story written about like this. That it makes such a difference."
But I think that's what's so amazing, that as again per the title of the book, that every family has these wild stories, don't they? Everyone's got something extraordinary, and yeah, unless they have the experience of having it documented, it just goes into that tree. Because at the beginning of, for the listener, at the beginning of each family story, you've got the family tree, which I just absolutely love looking at and trying to think of my own like that, and you realize how much we're all woven together, aren't we? But yeah, these stories that exist behind closed doors are fascinating, aren't they?
They are so fascinating, and the ordinary is extraordinary. There wouldn't be a person listening to this podcast who hasn't got something that happened in their family history,
Mm,
a baby that died, a child that died, someone who went broke, someone who died by suicide, someone who was traumatized in the war, someone,
mm,
all of these different elements that so influence how we manage in our life. And kind of one of my messages from the book, and I'd love to know if this was true for you, was that often people kind of think there's something wrong with me. And my message is, there isn't something wrong with you, but look up, look at the generations before you,
mm,
at the stories and patterns of behavior that
mm,
have not been told. And that,
mm.
the theory is, and obviously I believe it, is that the difficulty and the pain from the difficulty, whatever that is, that hasn't been dealt with in one generation, gets passed down to the next generation until someone is prepared to feel the
Fixes
pain.
it.
Because it's their behaviors. I mean, it may be epigenetically, as well. So it may be through the womb, but it's also the things that you do to block pain are the very things that in the end do you harm. And that those patterns we learn.
Yeah. It's so fascinating. I'm sitting here thinking of my paternal grandmother, who isn't alive anymore, sadly. But I don't like staying up late, and I get very overwhelmed if I in massive social occasions. And I've only realised recently that she used to very actively kick everybody out. She'd be like, "Time for everybody to leave now. Off you go." And I see it in my dad, and I was like, "Oh wow." She came across as a very strong together woman, but I'm wondering if she felt a lot of the same things, of this overwhelm, and yeah, that she'd worked very hard to make lovely family meals, but that there was a very finite ending on it. And
Sorry.
she would never have been able to. I wouldn't have expected her to have been able to articulate like anxious feelings, because it was at odds as how she presented. But I now always wonder if that was going on, and it's amazing, isn't it?
That is amazing, like from your grandmother to your dad to you. And, her generation didn't have a language for emotion. They didn't have any psychological insight or research or knowledge. All they knew was that you had to, um, forget and move on, like just
Mm,
put on a good show. And that was the only choice they have. I mean, I think we often look back at them with some kind of criticism or like they weren't doing it right. But actually, she was probably the child or the grandchild of someone who fought in the First World War. Maybe her
mm.
parents or her partner had fought in the Second World War. They had no luxury to say, "I am feeling this." Their only
Just to do it.
offer was to survive, multiply, and move on, was to keep going. And they did it
Mm.
damn well.
Yeah, I mean, I've got full admiration. Yeah, it's a very kind of stoic way of being, but yeah, you do wonder I mean, feelings just would not have been in the dialogue, but there must have been, of course, loads of feelings, and depending on what you think about star signs, she's a Pisces, as I am, which are extremely emotionally tuned in, and again, I just wonder how much of that was there. What I find interesting as well is that we're very quick to draw out positive attributes from generations. Everyone's like, oh, look, she really reminds me of them, or he reminds me of them. But we find it and we observe those quite readily, I think. But yeah, we are quick to brush under the carpet the more challenging parts. And you're so right; they will just continue to go from generation to generation unless we lean into them a bit, I suppose.
Yeah, and I think that's such a good point. And my understanding is that what we don't face, we can't fix. And I don't mean fix as a simple thing like, putting on a fixing a broken plug or something. But we need to come to terms with the things that are very difficult. And when we turn our face away and are in denial of them, they're like these ghosts of the nursery. They come and haunt us and influence us unconsciously and consciously in every
Mm.
aspect of our lives. And so it really helps in the same way as expanding your stories of, the generation you're in as a family of siblings or with your parents, expanding your story of, what happened to you in the past and dealing with it now protects yourself, but also it protects the next generation so that you
Mm.
don't hand down onto them what has been handed down to you.
Yeah, I think that sometimes is well, for me, a lot of the work I've done on myself, I found easier to do because I feel responsible to my children than as a gift to myself, and ends up being a byproduct of it. But this is the challenging thing, isn't it? We know what a huge deal this is. We know that as parents, we are shaping our children's future, but yet then you're in this tension with the fact that unpicking generational difficulties or challenges or trauma is also as big and as terrifying. And so you're left in this place where you go, I'm so overwhelmed by the premise of this that it's very easy just to plow on.
Yeah. I mean, and I think, this isn't something that you should do in one, like get a spade and start digging and make an enormous hole. This is a small micro step. Like begin to
Mhm.
have conversations with with your parents or your aunts and uncles or
Mhm.
family from or friends of family from that generation, so that in small ways in the pub, over supper, on a walk, so that you inch by inch hear an expanded version of what you know for now, and also to kind of begin it again in a small way. It's always small steps. It's never these huge acts of behavior that you want to change, because they're impossible if you do it too big, because you will always spring back like an elastic band to your kind of default mode of coping. Is to think about the aspects in yourself that you find difficult. So, what is your tendency? So, mine is to go to denial. I hate bad news. I absolutely hate, like everybody does. But,
Mm.
and my first response, despite decades of therapy, is I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to look at it. I'm going to do everything I possibly can to distract myself because I do not want to know. But then, I mean, the bigger it is, the longer it takes me to turn towards it and examine it. But eventually, you know, my knowledge and like my third eye says, okay, I wake up one morning and it's like, okay, I've got to do the work of this. I need to find out more or feel about it, talk about it, write it down, journal it, begin to work out what this means to me, what I'm feeling about it, what are my options, how do I respond to this? And that incrementally I adapt to this bad thing that I didn't want over time. And the single biggest thing that will support me is my relationship with myself, that I am self compassionate and I turn to myself with
Mm.
kindness. but also the love and connection of others. And I think what was difficult about, say, my parents' generation and my grandparents' generation is they didn't seek support. They just literally, battened down the hatches and, like you said, sort of marched on. And actually, what helps us is when we turn to our partner. I mean, day before yesterday, I had a difficult day, and I just made him hold me for like, I don't know, 10 minutes. And he kept on trying to let me go, and I just,
No,
not
not
done.
yet.
I didn't need any words. I just needed something
No,
to bring down the gears and
to
calm me
ground you.
down, to ground me. And um, then I began to feel better. And then I began to be able to talk about it. Because the thing is, when you're in the kind of red zone of fight, flight, or freeze, the way that you're wired, you disconnect from yourself and you just look for danger and whether you're going to fly or fight or kind of be, the Moro reflex frozen. And so your coping behaviors are never about the things that you actually need at that point. They're about how the hell do I get out of here? How do I sort myself out? And so that you need to breathe and bring yourself to a kind of calmer place, that then you have the right side of your brain responding more intelligently, connecting with yourself, emotions transmitting information, and then that gives you more data about how to effectively respond. But when you stay in code red, you make terrible decisions because you're going to do
Yeah.
anything to kill the fucker or run. And that isn't
Irrational,
always
utterly
and that isn't always best
no.
doesn't always serve you that well.
But I think you said something really interesting in relation to being held by your partner, and I think it relates to this family thing. This isn't always about finding you're not gonna find a neat little answer that, like, unpicks generations of struggles or, triggers, but it's beginning able to come at them with compassion and kind of ground yourself enough to not go for the reflex reaction in situations, isn't it?
Completely. And to know what your triggers are, to know what your default coping mechanism is, and then to know and to allow it. I can't change that. There's nothing is ever going to make me want to be okay with it. I just will never will. But then to know what can I do, given that that's my first response. You get the bad arrow, and it's your what you do with that bad arrow that predicts your
Mm,
outcome, and how you support
mm.
yourself, what you behave, not what you behave, how you behave, what you do to seek support that will be a massive predictor of your outcome.
Yeah, and you so often and it's what your kids are witnessing. They're seeing versions of that all the time, aren't they? And what we know about parenting is children reduce us down. Especially I'm at the point I've got very young children. They reduce us down to our most basic version of ourselves. Who I've got friends who are just about to become parents, and it's like the idea of the parent you think you're going to be is you're not gonna be it, and I think what the really extraordinary thing about the very first years of parenting is suddenly all this you might think you have a good relationship with your parents, but suddenly, I don't know what happens, but it all comes out of the woodwork, doesn't it? So you're simultaneously trying to navigate your own yeah, your own relationships with them whilst trying to parent for the first time.
I mean, I can see you
Extraordinary.
shaking your
It
head
was
like.
extraordinary. It's extraordinary, like, thing that happens, and, yeah, I can feel like I'm the other side of it, and I parent as me now as much as possible, but it's definitely a really challenging thing to navigate.
It really, really is. And I love you saying you're never the version of the parent that you think you're going to be. So there's this sort of picture book version, isn't there? That you're going to be kind of gliding through life with a baby on your boob, and the linen is going to be done, and you're going to be serving marvelous meals, and you're going to be just so loving and kind. And your reality is you're sleep deprived. You haven't even had a chance to go to the loo. you will eat anything just to kind of have food in your system, and you
Literally
hate
cramming it in your
anyone.
mouth.
Yeah, cramming, and you hate anyone who's had more sleep than you, which is virtually everyone. And
Yeah.
so, it pushes all of your buttons, all your relational buttons, your buttons of your relationship with your mum and dad, with yourself, with your partner, parent of your child, and with your child. And of course, relational buttons are the kind of hot wire buttons that
Yeah.
we can't really control. So I think one of my messages in the book is that, of course, children learn from how we behave and not what we do. But also this idea that we're always on a spectrum of functioning and dysfunctioning. And, it is such I can't think of, I was going to say killer, but that's not the right word. It's such an anathema to think you're going to have this perfect family. And that is such a cruel, kind of awful um, implement to use on yourself. Is,
Yeah.
I really think the Winnicott term good enough is an absolute miracle in families, that you're going to be a good enough family. So I was talking
Yeah.
to my daughter yesterday, and I was saying that people have been asking me about myself as a parent, and of course I did masses of mistakes, and I feel guilty, and I take responsibility. And she was really, she remembered some of the things I did, like when I was teaching her sister French, I threw the book at her. So
We've all got versions of that. My family's always revolved around Monopoly. There are
yeah,
many times of the Monopoly board being
tipped up.
lobbed.
I
Yeah.
remember, I remember my daughter, that same daughter, playing drafts with me, and she was winning, and I tipped the thing up. I mean, I look at myself and I think, what were you thinking?
But isn't it interesting, this a little aside that I have my children one of my children flicks my switches in an utterly irrational way, and it's not a comment on them. It's
No,
like, "Oh, wow, he sends me somewhere very, very quickly," and it's just like, yeah, it's really disarming, to be honest, when they do that, you would never expect to be throwing a French book, but I'm laughing because we've all done versions of that. Awful things. You're like, "Oh, this is not what I pictured." Anyway, what
no.
did she say about that to your daughter?
Well, and I was saying, um, I find it kind of difficult. Talking about them when this is me, kind of talking about me, and she was really loving, and she said, there's nothing you can say about me that I'll mind about, and then she was very loving, gave me kind of really loving text, and so that feels like, I mean, I cried when I got it, because she's 38 now, and I guess my message is, we make mistakes, but as long as we repair after the injury,
Mm,
there's always rupture. We get cross with each
mhm,
other, we make mistakes. Families force us to face versions of ourselves we didn't know existed, and certainly
mhm,
never wanted. And where we love most, we hate most, and become, terrible versions of ourselves. But it
mm,
isn't about that. It's about repairing it and
mm,
acknowledging it afterwards, and properly understanding what went on and communicating it with each other, and allowing for all the bad things, and also
mm,
knowing that the intention is to be loving and good, and that we fuck up,
mhm.
basically.
Yeah. Yeah, if you do things from a place of love, it doesn't give you a kind of, yeah, a carte blanche to do what you like, but I do think that is really centering to go, what as my intentions are, because I love this human and I want to give them the best upbringing I can. I hope that within reason, that is your center point.
Yeah,
It's
and
got
that
to be
we're all
quite good.
flawed.
Yeah. And I think interesting as you're saying, it's the rupture and repair. I wonder whether we find that so disarming because there wasn't as much rupture in previous generations. As we're saying, you just brush it under the carpet, you keep going. So our version of things working is just never ever rupture. But actually, what we know is that's all happening under the surface. But I think for my parents, it'd be fair to say that they would find the idea of rupturing something in a big conversation very, very difficult. Whereas I hope that that's the big shift. We can have these challenging conversations and come back from them.
Completely. And, I mean, maybe your parents are like my parents, was that what you don't talk about isn't going to hurt you. Like,
Yeah,
never talk about the
it's
things that
madness.
matter, and always talk about the things that literally don't matter at all.
Isn't that wild? And you can end up having these conversations where you're like, "What are we talking about?" Because we're all feeling something so different. That's a really interesting observation where you can often then feel shortchanged because it's just like we know that what we're just going through the motions of something here.
Yeah. And that is very, I mean, it makes you feel like you're a bit mad, or are you
Yes.
overreacting, or what are you missing, or what the fuck? What is going on? And so that thing that, again, I hope comes through in the book is just naming what your perception of what you're seeing and what you're feeling is happening,
Mm.
and doing it with the people that you care about most
Hmm.
has an enormous capacity to reconnect us after there's been a misunderstanding or a rupture, or that you're suffering. And that then our family is our safe place to go back to
Mm.
and heal our
Mm.
wounds and lick our wounds and be difficult, because when we're suffering, you know, hurt people. So,
Mm.
me, all of us, we are not the best versions of ourselves when we're going through something difficult. We lost our job or we have a health diagnosis. We don't become, Saint Teresa. We become often, because we're scared and we're angry, we become difficult and demanding. And so our friends are a bit scared of us. They tend to back off, or they send little text messages, saying, let me know if there's anything I can do. And it's really our family, if we're lucky enough to have family around us, or the family that we've created through friendship, that are the people that need to hold us steady when our world
Mm.
has gone off kilter, and that we are being very difficult. Um, but they
It,
support us with that, not despite it.
yeah, what I'm wondering is when you're talking is whether actually there's as well a thing where we need to let people be in their very difficult, unattractive, horrible versions of themselves. Because I think there's again a real tendency to try and fix that. Like going back to the analogy with your partner and asking him just to hug me. I don't need a solution. I'm progressing to the solution myself eventually, hopefully.
Mm.
But we're very quick to, you shouldn't feel angry, you shouldn't feel sad. Actually, I really do feel angry and sad and cross, and yeah, it's not to be solved. It's just a bit to sit alongside.
To be allowed, yeah, and to sit
Yeah,
alongside, be beside me, yeah, listen to me.
I always, yeah, I always when my kids are being the most, unhinged, and if they're upset and wound up, I found that if I just give them a hug and say I'm here over and over again. I can literally feel their nervous systems kind of drop. It's like, I'm not going to tell you it's okay or not to feel this. I'm just here with you as you feel whatever you feel, however long that takes to come back to yourself. And I think that's really what we all need in our families, don't we?
Yeah,
To support us in our
to be
hardest
allowed to be
times.
sad and distressed and cross and
Mm,
confused, and to let, emotion, as I said before, is a transmitter of information, and it's there to give us information to then be voiced. So then we can work out what we do with it, and that when we
mhm.
block that emotion, so if you'd said to one of your children, don't be sad, don't be cross, which most of us were told, like, that cuts off the, the whole
But I
kind of
am.
emotional
Yeah.
intelligence. And then it's like, oh, well, I'm not sad. So then what am I? And you
Yeah.
lose connection with yourself. And then you lose what your needs are. You can't get your needs met. And then that can lead to all sorts of, on the far end, addiction, mental illness, because your internal authenticity has been kind of sent on a haywire kind of confusion, and then you've got nothing that you can, when you turn into yourself, that you can hold on to, that you trust, and you lose trust
Mm.
in your basic self. And that is a very frightening place to be.
Yeah, it's as simple as that, isn't it? This is again the terrifying thing about parenting. You aren't damaging your kids in the big life events that happen. It's in those tiny, tiny, small interactions. And as you say, how you react to them when they're emotional. And also what I'm trying to work on is because I am very in touch with my emotions, trying not to hide that from my children either. They've seen me cry a lot, and that isn't something that I'm embarrassed or ashamed or something to be worried about. I don't want it to become the equivalent of the eyebrow. Like, see, you can see mummy cry and it not mean that anything terrible is happening. I'm just feeling some feelings.
Yeah,
And it's a big shift, isn't it?
that is a big shift. And I feel very hopeful for your children's generation. But actually, I'm 62, so if I look at Gen Z, um, now, they have been on the front lines of forcing us to look at their emotions, to allow them to feel, to name their grief, to name their worry about the environment and climate change. And, we may shout at them, or my generation may shout at them, that they're woke or that they're kind of oversharing. But actually, they have an emotional intelligence that we don't have, and that
No.
we really need to listen to them and pay attention and allow them
Mm.
their voice, because their voice is really important.
And I mean, there's so much truth in that. With children, they name the stuff they feel, they name the stuff they think, they don't know to conform, and then it's utterly on ourselves when we go, "Oh, you're a bit too frank," but if we all, you have to learn to be polite and not hurt people's feelings, but actually their intention never is based on that, and yeah, we just realize how much we've been, yeah, cultured to shut our mouths in situations when you don't need to.
And honesty is not complicated. So,
No,
like,
it's a
if
gift.
your son's saying to you, "Mum, you're being horrid to me,"
Like,
that is
oh,
very straightforward. It's like you do not want to
yeah,
hear it, but it's like,
no,
oh, ooh,
I am, you're
okay,
probably right.
yeah. And
Yeah, and what we don't do is go, "No, you're not. No, I'm not. You're wrong." Well, you're
yes,
feeling that, so I've got to
listen,
suck it up.
yeah, yeah,
It's fascinating. So as we wind towards the end, I'm trying to think, because it can, as we've acknowledged, feel really overwhelming, but there's some really wonderful things in the book that can help, in the right direction. Not as far as going into family therapy, but I can't remember what the framework is, but even if we know about our family history, as in where our parents met, where our grandparents are from, that it can be a real stepping stone. I absolutely love that.
it's called the Do You Know scale, and there's a link to it on the back of the book. And yeah, it's so interesting. The research showed that people who knew more about their family history, it's like where their grandparents were born, what their parents, where they met, all of the stories that inform them, that they have more confidence and a sense of agency in the world. Because I guess they have all the pieces of the jigsaw that makes them who they are. They know those pieces, and it's often the pieces of the jigsaw that are missing that obsess us, that slightly drive us mad. So the more
Wow.
stories we know, then we have that grounds us. It really kind of gives us a foundation of our sense of identity and belonging, and what tribe I'm part of, and that I am loved and I am safe.
I adore that. And I'm thinking that we spend an awful lot of time now having access to other people's lives on a huge scale through social media. But wouldn't it be amazing if we put a little bit of that energy into knowing the people who we are deeply connected with, and delving into that? I think that would be such a gift to each of us, and really interesting and important, especially the older generation. They love the opportunity to be able to share those stories. We just are out of the habit of asking about it, I think.
Yeah, I mean that's such a good point. I hadn't really thought of it like that, but yeah, we can scroll down Instagram looking at people that we are never going to meet and really should have no reason to be remotely interested in, and and yet know everything about where they buy their clothes and how many kids they've got. And we don't even, I mean, one of the stories in the book, the mum was saying you can be in your family and not know the people in your own family because you've just had this set of assumptions and the story you're
Mm.
telling yourself, which isn't actually the bigger story, which is all of your story. It's a collective story. And so I think that can be transformational for families.
Mm. I'm thinking as you're speaking, my granny sadly died in 2020, aged 100, my
Oh,
maternal
wow.
grandmother. 100, amazing.
Wait, wow.
Um,
Yeah, she saw a
yeah,
lot.
and yeah, she saw a lot. She actually died in the February before COVID, which I feel really relieved about, to be honest.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but when we went and had a ceremony for her last year, my mum was talking about what she was like in her 30s, my granny, and it's like, oh yeah, I knew her as an old lady, and apparently she was basically a bit of a flirt, and that she would have a terrible twinkle in her eye whenever any men were around. It's like, oh, it's so nice to try and think of that person, because again, in the latter stage of people's life, you get these imprints of someone who they've become. But I was like, oh, I'd really like to have hung out with that version of my granny. I think she would have been really fun. And yeah,
And
I think
maybe
that was
she's
a
in
good.
you, you know,
Yeah,
that she
definitely.
isn't
I
just
see
the
her.
knitting granny,
Yeah,
but she's the flirting, sassy,
yeah,
energetic one who kind of likes a flirt and likes to dance.
yeah.
And
And that's really important, isn't it? Because we end up becoming very certain versions of ourselves through the experience of life and everything that it brings us. But yeah, I certainly I'm 40 on Sunday, so I'm in a bit of a
ah,
life transition moment,
a
and
milestone.
a real milestone. And I mean, this is a bit woo woo, but I spoke to an astrologist on Monday. And she said the key to the next chapter of your life, Clemmy, is going back to the childhood version of yourself and remembering who you are. And
Lovely.
yeah, and my daughter, who's 4, I see a lot of myself in her, and I just keep thinking, and actually I see my granny in her. So it's like, what would Greta do in this situation? What spirit would she come at this with that hasn't been clouded by, the last 40 years? And I think that's just such a gift. And I think that kind of all loops back into it, isn't it? You can bring the amazing generational things um, into you, as well as the complicated stuff.
Completely. And, at the end of the book, I did this set of 12 touchstones for the well being of family. And one of those touchstones was to have fun as a family. And you saying that made me think of that, is that you can be your 4-year-old self with your 4-year-old daughter and
Mm,
kind of let go of the kind of adult that has to kind of be on it all the time, but really let yourself, I don't know, dress up and dance with her, play with her, paint with her, skip with her, sing crazily in the kitchen with her, and be the fun version of you that
mm,
is in her and is in you, and that the multiplying kind of bonus effect on the energy in the whole family when you can do that
mm.
is such a gift to all of you, that you feel like you've had like 10 years therapy just by a bit of skipping in the kitchen.
And actually, for all the bits when we don't want to throw French books or Monopoly boards at our
Thank you for
kids,
reminding me.
um, but you also I feel like it's a very good call to myself to say, what would Greta do? I have to kind of nudge myself to connect to that part of me, because you are so wound up in packing the dishwasher, remembering all the things. But if you can, as well as worrying about trying to be a positive influence, just kind of be more fun. That does
Yourself, be
get you
more
a long way.
yourself.
Be more
And I can
yourself.
see, even I've never met you, but I can see that fun part of you is a kind of sparkly, bright part that really wants to have a place, right?
Yeah, I wore yesterday. I went out for dinner for my birthday, and I was putting on some bits of jewelry, and I was like, Greta would just put on all this jewelry. So I
Yeah,
literally basically put my entire jewelry box on. I was like, going out for dinner for my 40th birthday with my mum and stepdad. It's like, wear the jewelry, wear the jewelry.
yeah,
When is the right day to wear your whole jewelry box if you don't put it on now?
yeah.
And
Look
I
like a
felt great all
Christmas
day.
tree. Yeah, like go for it. Yeah, it's so
You don't
fun.
need to. Yeah, and I think there's yeah, as I say, I see that from my granny, the sparkly-eyed, naughty 30-year-old. So, oh yeah, I don't really know why I'm talking about this, but yeah, it can all be a gift if you work hard to pick out the bits that you want to carry on and lean into the bits that you ought to try and unpick a bit, I suppose.
And, again, going back to the touchstones, one of the things I suggested was to make habits rituals. So in your family, there is probably a ritual around birthdays that we have dinner together, we celebrate, we mark important days, and that's so important, having these rituals that kind of externally represent what is actually invisible, so that you will go back, and the body remembers, the body holds the score. When you're 80, you'll be able to go back and remember you dressed up like a Christmas tree on your 40th birthday, having fun with your mum and your stepdad, kind of channeling, is that the word,
Mm,
your grandmother. And that will keep you alive and sparkly at 80. That those
mm,
memories stay alive in us, that love that we
mm.
have, even when someone dies, stays alive in us. And those rituals are such a wonderful way to embody that.
Emotional. This is going to get me. It's so true, isn't it? And yeah, yeah. It's very profound. I think when I actually, particularly after my daughter, who's my third child, when I had her, I really had this very strong, visceral sense of the lineage that I just kind of created the next step of. And it's only in usually in birth and in death when you have that. Oh my word! I get it. I get where this belongs. But the more we can hold on to that, I think there's a real superpower in it.
There is a real superpower in it. And the sort of connection with ourselves and our families, our children, our grandparents, our parents, is a superpower, and that those connections, connecting with their community and the kind of networks of people around them, that is where you get real kind of superpower as a people, as humanity, because we
Mm,
are wired to connect, to dance, to play, to flirt, to eat, to cry, to move, to hug, to fight. And we need the
mm,
people around us, all of those different people, in order to be able to do that.
mm. I'm gonna wind it up there because I think that's a beautiful place to end. But I do always ask two more questions. First of all, where can people find you? And this is a chance to do a real good plug of the book, which I think we've done because it is brilliant. Where can people get the book?
So thank you for that. So people can find me on Facebook and Instagram, and I have a website, www.juliasamuel.co.uk. My book is in all good independent bookshops, coming out on March the 17th, and you can pre-order on Amazon. And thank you for enjoying my book. It just, when you're writing a book, it's such an insular, private thing, and you never know how people are going to receive it. So hearing that you really like it is a big thing for me.
I mean, yeah, well done you. It's really brilliant. I mean, I've read your other books as well, but yeah, there's something about family that is feels very untapped. But yeah, it's brilliant. And one last question: if you could have an honest conversation with one person, who would it be, and what would you say?
Oh, I think it would be with my father, who's been dead about 8 years. And my question to him is, how much did you know?
Wow. Wow. I mean, that's like, what a brilliant question. But there's so many versions of those questions hanging in people's lives, aren't there?
That I never asked. Well, I didn't even think to ask. No, so it's a shame. It's gone now. They've all gone. So while
Yeah,
people are
it is.
alive, talk to them now
Ask
is
them.
my message. Yeah, ask them.
Yeah, and you know what? It's easier said than done, but however difficult those conversations are, they're better than the unanswered question. Yeah,
You're haunted by regrets. You're not haunted by daring to
challenging.
have the difficult conversation.
No, no. I'm really trying to practice that in myself, because I try and profess honesty in difficult conversations, and I do it well in a professional setting, but it's really hard privately. It's really hard to sit there through those challenging conversations, and all your nervous system goes, as you say, you go into that red zone and have a very irrational thoughts. But the more you do it, the more practiced you become at it, the less your nervous system goes, and the more things that could fester and become issues and ruin relationships can actually be resolved
Yeah.
through a difficult 20 minutes.
And that you might find that what you've assumed and made up in your head would be the reaction is absolutely not the reaction. It might be that
No.
someone's relieved to finally tell the truth and that you're willing to listen and want to know.
Yeah, being being heard is such a gift, isn't it? I always think that when my kids are dilly-dallying at bedtime and just literally firing every question they've ever thought of, but actually, and I know, and you're thinking, "I'm really hungry, I just wanna get downstairs and have dinner." But actually, they just want your undivided listening ears for 5-10 minutes, don't they?
Yeah. And to give them, yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. It's been, yeah, rewarding and emotional conversation. I definitely feel like I've got this whole thing. When everything you're doing begins to align to similar versions of themes coming up, you're like, what's going on?
Well, I'm fascinated that you spoke to me at such a significant milestone day that you're 40. You can't pretend you're
Yeah.
not a grown up anymore. And
No, I know, it's huge.
but reminding yourself to play and be young, it's like a wonderful spot to be in. And I've loved our conversation, Clemmy. Thank you so much.
Oh, so have I. It's been really, yeah, it's been quite profound. I've had, yeah, 3 of these profound conversations recently, which have just been like, "Clemmy, whatever's happening." So, yeah, depending on what you believe in astrology, she said to me, "You're a year and a half into a 3-year everything about you changing," and she's like, "You won't recognise yourself in a year and a half, but go into the cave. Don't be scared of the cave, and sit there, and you'll feel, yeah, whoever you are in a year and a half, you'll be like, thank goodness for that." Ugh.
I would add to ensure that you support yourself and seek support to manage that.
Yeah. Yeah, she did say, because I was in therapy last year, did EMDR therapy, which was
Oh wow! I'm
brutal.
I'm a qualified EMDR therapist.
Ugh.
I think
Yeah, and
it's
then I
a
just,
magic.
yes, I did 9 months of it, and then I've had 6 months off because I felt like I needed to
Whew,
let my
that's a
brain,
lot. Yeah, settle.
yeah, just,
Jeez.
yeah, and not spend one day a week crying for an hour, and now I'm ready to go back to that place, but it
Oh
just,
wow.
not back to EMDR. I think
No,
I've,
dealt with the
yeah.
trauma. Good for you.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll see. It's all family related, and I'm gonna see all my family this weekend, so if I can get to Monday without losing my shit, then something will have
Done.
worked.
Yeah, that's amazing. Just go slow.
Yeah.
Remember to breathe. Time out for yourself.
Yeah, that's, so it's my actual birthday on Sunday, and I said to Ben, my husband, "I'm gonna get up and I'm gonna go for half an hour walk in the woods, ground myself, and then I'll be the daughter and mother that I should be on my birthday, rather than being
Nice.
not very nice." So thank you.